And here we have the third one in the series. Oh boy. This one was quite the challenge. When I looked at the colors, I immediately thought ocean, but when I was experimenting with the colors, I realized a lot of them did not work next to each other. While, like, it was again with the case of some of the colors in the palette looked really nice together, and then some really didn't. And then so it became a really big challenge on what colors I was going to use. The only direction I knew I was going in was that I wanted to make it kind of ocean themed because the colors reminded me of like ocean waters and sand and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I went for, and it kind of ended up looking like Pfeffery a little bit. Kind of, you can see some resemblance. That wasn't intentional, but kind of ended up looking that way, I guess. But yeah. Overall, though, I don't think this turned out half bad. I actually rather like the result of it, even though I think it is a little bit messy, and I, it did take me a little while because I just couldn't figure out how I wanted the colors to work. Because, and just again, like some of them didn't look good. Like the blues looked nice together, but the orange didn't look, and the orange and the brown didn't look nice with the blue, and then it was weird. And but I think it worked out pretty well, and I'm pretty satisfied with the results. So hey, um, I thought for the tip for this palette challenge, the advice I wanted to do for this one, the mini tutorial, quote unquote, mini art advice. I don't know what to call it. Um, I decided the best one for this one would actually be blending because there was, as you'll be able to see throughout the video, there's a lot of blending being done with her hair and then the background. And I thought this would be a good one to talk about blending since I was blending a lot of unrelated colors together, so to speak. Uh, Now, for one thing, I'll say is that blending is something that beginners should not be concerned with. If you are a beginning artist and you've just recently got started, focus more on things like anatomy, realism, basic lighting and shading, not even complicated, just basic stuff, basic anatomy. Probably focus more on like realism drawing, stuff like that. Blending with colors and stuff like that is something more it's something better suited to learn more when you're more intermediate and when you have a good grasp on how to draw, because once you can draw basically, other stuff are is easier to learn. And it's if you try to learn this kind of stuff when you can't even do basic anatomy, it's not going to help you. It's just not going to help you. So I would suggest, if you're a beginner, you can take this into consideration, certainly. I mean, by all means, go ahead and take this into consideration. But I do want to say that beginning artists, I think my recommendation is, if you're a beginning artist, to focus more on your anatomy and basic color theory before you get into all the painting stuff and all the really complex stuff, like multiple light sources, things like blending, of course, stuff like that. I suggest perspective, focus more on like the basics before you get into the complicated stuff. That's my own advice. That's like my little, it's not even a disclaimer. I don't know why, I just felt like mentioning that. But anyway, enough my ramblings. Uh, so blending is something that I often see quite a lot of artists, not just beginners, but even like amateurs and intermediate artists who it's something that isn't really taught very often. It's something that you'll often hear like when it comes to realism, like blending and stuff like that. But when it comes to digital art, there's not a lot of people who give tutorials on it, which is I mean, there's a good one by Walking Millions AAA on YouTube. I suggest you go check them out. She's a beautiful artist, got some great art, and she's the person who inspired the pencil I used for my line work and stuff. So definitely suggest you go check her out. But she gave a good tutorial on blending, so some of this is kind of derived from there, but it's also based on stuff I've learned. Now, what I often see people do when they blend things is they either take a base color, take the color they want to use, and they just take a gradient tool and they do a gradient. Uh, and another thing I see is they'll often take, like, they'll select the thing and they'll take the airbrush and they'll just go through at like the ends of something, and and that's how they put their ombre and their gradients and stuff like that. And the issue with those techniques with digital art is that you end up getting a very, very weird, like you'll get very weird colors that shouldn't be there. If you just take an eyedropper and go through like the in betweens of the two colors, like you'll have your base, you'll have your two bases, and then in between, if you take like an eyedropper and you actually look at the colors that are there, you'll find they're not very good colors, and you'll get weird random specks and rings and all sorts of weird stuff. So it's often better to blend by hand rather than trying to blend with gradients and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with gradients. And honestly, there's been times where I've used a gradient to start with and then I'll go back in and blend manually. But a lot of people don't often know how to go about that. So honestly, this is something better taught in an actual like tutorial showing you kind of thing. But you can kind of see how I did it here. The best idea is if you pick out the two colors you want to use for your gradient, and what you want to do is take a brush, whether it be an airbrush, a soft kind of watercolory brush, or like for this one I used a lot of the watercolor brush that's in Procreate. And once you go in there though, and you don't see as good of an example here, but if you see, like, for example, back when I drew all my gem characters, if you look at Klonohimai and her hair, I do the effect right there. The strategy for blending colors together very good is not just sort of blending just two colors. Once you get two base colors and then the middle section, what you want to do is you want to go back and get those middle colors and then go in and soften between those. And again, this is probably sounding super confusing, but you can kind of watch what I'm doing here and maybe kind of get an idea, although this one's probably not the best example of it. Again, I suggest you go see Walking Melons AAA made a video about blending, which I definitely suggest you go watch because it describes what I'm trying to discuss here. But you should often try for blending to get a much nicer effect is to just do it yourself. And also, here's another thing. If you're blending two colors that are very far apart on the spectrum, such as purple and yellow, or I don't know, like even purple and blue, and like purple and teal and things like that, or like red and yellow and stuff like that, you don't want to just use those two colors when you blend most of the time when you do it manually. And the reason why is because they don't form most of the in-between colors. Like, for example, the best example I could give is if you wanted something to start out yellow and then fade to red. If you just put them like that and you just put a gradient in between there of red on top of yellow, it's gonna look like a weird mustard and ketchup kind of thing, and it doesn't look very pretty. So how you get that nice little like sunsetty kind of look is that you actually manually go in there and in between the red and the orange, you actually the red and yellow is you actually put orange in there. Or even what you can do is take, say you start out with yellow and you basically just, before you do the red, you do some blending with orange, and then you go back in and you do red on top of the orange. And again, this is probably sounding very confusing. You're probably, well, like, how do I do that? Well, a lot of it has to do with pen pressure, I'll tell you that for sure. And again, I can't show you very well because I'm not actually, like, this isn't a proper tutorial. This is just me talking over a video. But I definitely suggest you actually look around on how to blend, because many people rely heavily on the gradient tool and just the airbrush tool to do the blending for them. But that's not going to often work for you. You have to figure out, like, it has a lot to do with color theory when it comes to blending. And even with shading, you often, when you do soft shading, it's sometimes a good idea, rather than just using an airbrush, to actually go in and kind of paint the soft shading yourself. Obviously, this doesn't apply to cell shading because it's all hard edges everywhere, but when you do like soft painterly shading, it's a really good idea to go in and, rather than just using the airbrush tool, but sort of actually paint it in yourself, so to speak, using like a soft a sort of like, I don't know what the good term for it is, like a soft sort of watercolor brush, or a like a soft airbrush kind of thing, or like a hard airbrush, you know? If you use things like that and actually kind of paint in the shading and actually use, if you're using digital, mind you, like this works for digital. I guess this could work for traditional as well, but for digital art, you want to utilize pen pressure as much as you can. A lot of people don't seem to realize that pen pressure is very, very valuable um, when it comes to drawing. Like for size, for line variety, and shading and blending and smoothing and all that other fun stuff. So this quote unquote tutorial was probably super confusing. I deeply apologize, but that's my tips with blending. I just suggest that you experiment more, and if you're kind of a more intermediate artist and you rely a lot on the airbrush and the gradient tool to do a lot of your blending, I suggest you start looking into how to start blending on your own and doing it manually, because trust me, the results are going to look so much nicer. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. You can give me your critiques on my palette challenge here. Hopefully I'll have the fourth one sometime soon. I'm not sure exactly when, but I hope you enjoyed, and leave a like if you enjoyed. If you didn't like the video, feel free to leave a dislike. If you enjoy my content and want to see more, hit the subscribe button, and that is all for today. I am the Zodiac Lord, and I'll see you in the next video, whatever it may be. Zodiac out.